All right, so Hopebridge Community Arts Center. This is a fake non-for-profit. This is just scenario-based, something that I came up with the help of researching, and have basically tried to build a non-for-profit example for you. So let's get into it. I want to thank Denise Kavanaugh firstly for allowing me to speak today, and hopefully, like I said, this can provide you some financial insight, whether you're an executive director or a non-for-profit leader, such as a CFO or financial officer, whatever you want to call yourself in a non-for-profit world, that this would be beneficial to you. So let's get started. Hopebridge Community Arts Center, a non-for-profit under financial distress, a classroom case analysis, and operating reserves, structural deficits, restricted assets, and turnaround governance, a case study. Part 1, the background, mission, community reach, scale, and operating baseline prior to the financial crisis. So this company was founded in 1998 in upstate New York. Hopebridge Community Arts Center operates as a 501c, aiming to democratize visual and performing arts education. Pre-crisis budget was 2.8 million. There was 22 full-time staff and 40 part-time teaching artists. Facilities footprint: one central community arts center plus 2 satellite learning classrooms in lower income areas. So relatively easy to manage in theory. Part 2, the financial decline. Auditor warnings of substantial doubt as a going concern driven by systemic financial and administrative issues. So let's see what some of the problem areas are. So we have a grant cliff. 46% of total operational revenue depended on a single multi-year state arts grant that expired in 2023, and there was no grants to replace it. There was nothing put in place. There was nothing that was approved, nothing coming in, so you lost 46% of your revenue. So enrollment drop. Post-pandemic program enrollment fell 27% from historic baselines due to localized inflation and public transit barriers. Facility overruns, urgent HVAC and roof failures on the primary historic facilities ballooned year over year maintenance expenses by plus 40. So lack of budget implementation, lack of facility maintenance. Usually in a perfect world of non-for-profit, you're doing your budget and you're making these kind of the facilities upgrades would be kind of considered in the budget, and then you would basically try to, over it's a 5-year plan, 1-year plan, you would try to, basically put any big facility upgrades into that and allocate it across the year. That way it's not making a huge variance month over month. It's in a perfect world. So control failures, there's also leadership turnover coupled with no cash flow forecasting led to program managers overspending budgets by 180,000. So basically, this is a lack of controls, whether it's from the CFO or the executive director, and now the program managers, because you provide services, has overspent by the budget by 180,000. So these are just key issues and lack of management controls that are now creating the problem. So as seen here, this is strictly a non-for-profit statement of activities. This isn't a for-profit statement of activities. It would look different. But on the non-for-profit side, you'd have your grants, your program services, and those basically go hand in hand. So your grants would basically subsidize your program services in a perfect. And then you would also, capture that. So grants and contributions year over year, you went from 1.4 million down to 1 million, a little bit over, which is a 29% variance. Your fees are down about 150,000, give or take. So like I said, that's also down 26%. But like I said, this bridge of 450 does not equals this. So like I said, so you're still just losing money because you don't have that grant to replace it. Facilities rental and other income here went down, roughly 60,000, 65,000. So down almost 40%. That's your total revenue support line as seen on the orange line right here. So total revenue and support, you are down 29%. Your program services on your expense side, what are the services that you're providing? You're providing arts to students essentially and teaching and, enabling them to perform art. So the services are 1.8 million. That went up to 1.9 million. So now you literally lost in grants and contributions, and then you also went up on your expense line here. So like I said, that's problem areas. You want to usually, in theory, you want this to stay the same or close, which it did, but then you want your grants and contributions to offset that and stay either the same or over. Because like I said, you're about 400,000 less here than here. So like I said, you want this number to be over this number in theory, right? Simple math. Sorry. So supporting services, fundraising went from 730 to 745,000. So that's, close percentage there, not a big variance. So your total operation expenses have gone up 3%. That's about average. Like I said, in a real non-for-profit, this is really the numbers you want to stay pretty much the same. And in this case, it did. Just your main issue you're having is you went down 29% here. So you're just losing substantially, which, like I said, in a perfect world, your month over month budgets and your variance reports you would be running, you would have flagged this early on. But like I said, in this, we're just using this as an example just to show you a huge offset, just for, like I said, ease of access. So your net change in assets, like I said, went from 20,000 to 860,000 in negative. So 4,200% decrease. So like I said, so huge financial problems. Like I said, those are things that you need to have grants in store and then something in to replace it, whether you're doing it by grants or contributions, fundraising, whatever. Something has to replace it so that way you're not losing that kind of money year over year. So according to this is our balance sheet distress. You have 1.2 months of cash flow, and I want to emphasize that in a good functioning, financially secure non-for-profit, you would want at least 3 to 6 months of operating expenses just to show stability. So you're about a month and a half less than that. In a very strong financial position, you would have 6 to 12 months. So like I said, obviously you're 10 or 9 months away from that. So, like I said, you'd want to hopefully have cash flow that would subsidize you, and that way, if something does happen, such as facility problems or something like that, you're not in a financial bind like this company is in particular. So your accounts payable is 310, cash equivalents 120. You're running on the 600 line of credit right now that's nearly maxed out. So these are all problem areas. Net assets with restrictions, that usually means that such as a building, facilities, whatever someone has given you, but it has restrictions on it, so it's for a purpose that they have said that it has to be used for the specific program or facility. So unrestricted, you have 560,000. So core systematic weaknesses. Severe liquidity deficit. Unrestricted cash reserves cover less than 37 days average operating expenses. So that's that 1.2 month of cash flow that we just discussed. High reliance on short-term interest lines. Mismanagement and donor restrictions. The restricted funds are 200,000 were unintentionally diverted to cover day-to-day payroll and general overhead. So like I said, so that's a problem on two sides, right? They were restricted funds, so they were for something already due to the donor. And then on top of that, you use it to cover payroll, which, like I said, that's a huge red flag as far as auditing goes. Could potentially lead to fraudulent charges later, things like that, because you're using funds for something else. They were for a restricted asset or a restricted program, and now you're using it to cover payroll. So that could be huge liability issues later. Capital and infrastructure backlog, deferred maintenance on HVAC repairs have accrued to $1.1 million. So, like I said, huge maintenance repairs that were not subsidized in the budget and were not replaced by a grant or some sort of other, positive profit area that's going into it. So, government oversight failure. The board of directors met over a year without standard financial dashboards or budget to actual variance. So, like I said, in a normal, perfect non for profit, you would have month to month meetings discussing your budget to actual variance reports. So, like I said, in theory, this would have been caught, within a month or two, and it wouldn't have compounded as it did to 29% on the finance side. But like I said, in this specific area, the board did not meet for a year, so that has basically made this a horrible scenario because they weren't proactive in their approach. They weren't going over the budget to actual variance reports and seeing that there was, huge grant issues coming up, something that impacted that they weren't planning, and now they're in this crisis. So ethical dilemmas. So funder representation, misleading metrics, communication channels with major grantors and private donors, overstated historical programmatic participation numbers by including duplicate outreach touch points rather than unique enrolled students. So like I said, a lot of these companies get grant funding or donor money for specific, like in this case, for students to enroll and take the courses, right? So they get subsidized by those grants or donors. In this case, they were using the wrong metric and they were using duplicate outreach touch points such as emails, calls, and events, repeats, visits, rather than actual students enrolled. So they were either submitting the wrong forms to the grants to try to get them approved, or like I said, they were found that they overstated their numbers considerably, so they received less funding. So like I said, it's important to use the right metrics when you're submitting for grants. That way you can get funded appropriately. Fiduciary decisions. Executive staff approved programmatic and vendor commitments despite internally possessing written knowledge that the cash reserves were insufficient. Furthermore, late 990 filing forms, risk IRS compliance audits. So keep that in mind also, because I do grant reviews for a big Florida company, and it's important to keep your 990s up to date. The dates for the 990s, if you are in the non-for-profit sector specifically, if you have a year end of December 31st, then the form is due the following May. So if it's, say, for example, December 2026, then you need to submit it by May 2027. That is your deadline for the 990 to be due and to be in compliance, okay? If your year end ends in June of the year, so say June 30, 2026, it is due November of the same year, so November of 2026. So either way, you're getting 6 months. It just depends on when your basically year end is considered. Okay, so just keep that in mind though for compliance, and also like I said, I do the grant reviews, so this does come up when you're going for grant funding. They want to know, are they filing on time? Is their audit correct? So that way they can, those are basically graded materials that will qualify you for grants better than if you didn't have it filed on time. Okay, and you can ask for extensions. Like I said, that's up to the state that you're in, but you can ask for extensions as well on those. But like I said, it has to be communicated in a timely manner and before the deadline. All right, so just little side pieces for you there. So turnaround action plan. This is where I'm going to hand it off to Denise. She's going to basically go through with you guys and present, an exercise to you to complete. And at this time, like I said, it is up to her. I'll pass it along, and like I said, she will come back and go through these next slides herself, and I will be gone. But like I said, I do want to thank Denise for this opportunity, and I hope that this information has been knowledgeable for you. I will give her the video if she wants to pass it on, or the slides without my narrative. That way, you can review it in peace and can go through at your own pace. Okay, so you guys have a wonderful day, and best of luck in completing this exercise.